I want to start with the truth. 3 words. Jesus is real. Now I know, depending on who you are, that might feel obvious or it might feel like a stretch. But before you can decide what you believe, just stay with me for a few minutes. Because this isn't just about religion, it's about something or someone that changed everything. To begin, if Jesus is real, then he shouldn't only exist inside the Bible. History should say something too, and it does. There is a Roman historian who wasn't a Christian, didn't believe in Jesus, didn't follow him, and yet still recorded that Jesus was executed under Pontius Pilate, and that his followers kept going even after he died. Think about that. You don't write that down unless it actually happens. And it wasn't just one voice. Multiple sources, Roman and Jewish alike, that acknowledged him, not as a myth, but as a man. So, at this point, the question isn't really, did Jesus exist? The real question is, who really was he? Because Jesus didn't just exist quietly. He said things that made people uncomfortable. He forgave sins as if he had the authority to do it. He said he was and God were one. He told people he was the only way to eternal life. At one point, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. That's not vague. That's not philosophical. That's either true or it's not. So we're left with the tension. Was he lying? Was he delusional? Or was he telling the truth? Because those are really the only options. And when you look at how he lived, how he treated people, how he spoke, how consistent he was, it doesn't read like a deception. And it doesn't read like insanity either. Now, here's where things start to get hard to ignore. Long before Jesus was ever born, there were writings describing a coming Messiah, where he'd been born, what his life would look like, even how he would die. One of them says, he was pierced for our transgressions. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. Isaiah 53:5. That was written hundreds of years before crucifixion was even a common practice. And then Jesus shows up and fulfills it, not loosely, specifically. At some point, you have to ask, how many coincidences does it take before it stops being a coincidence? But all this leads to one moment, one claim that everything stands or falls on, the resurrection. Because if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, this is just another story. But if he did, then this changes everything. After he was crucified, people claimed they saw him alive again. Not one or two people, groups of them, eating with him, talking with him. And these people weren't gaining power from this. They were hunted, killed, and still they didn't back down. There's a line in the Bible that says, he appeared to more than 500 other brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still breathing. 1 Corinthians 15:6. In other words, go ask them. Check for yourself. It's not how you write fiction. Something happened, something powerful enough to turn fear into courage. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, but it's still the Bible. Can we trust it? And that's a fair question. But when you actually look at it, the Bible isn't fragile. It's surprisingly well supported. Thousands of manuscripts, consistency across copies, details that line up with real places, real people, real history. And the New Testament, it was written close enough to events that people could have called it out. But instead of stopping, it spread quickly. And here's what really gets me. This doesn't just stay in the past. Jesus didn't just influence history. He's still changing people. Across different countries, cultures, backgrounds, people keep saying the same thing, that he's real, not just historically, but personally. There's a verse that says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. Revelation 3:20. That's not distant. That's personal. So what does all of this point to? Not just a good teacher, not just a historical figure, but someone who stepped into our world, knew exactly what we were like, and still chose to love us. It says, God demonstrated his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. Not after we fixed ourselves, not after we got everything right, while we were still a mess. So when I say Jesus is real, I don't mean it lightly. I mean it historically, logically, and personally. At some point, it stops being evidence, and it becomes a question you have to answer for yourself. It's not just, is he real, but what does it mean for you if he is?